no pain. But it is in silence now, the weight of all the significance found survives the fall. Animal, afraid of wings and flight, bound forever to the landslide of the But it is in silence now, the weight of all the significance found survives the fall. Face it coming into the calling. Why are you crawling in the divide?
All right. It always sounds funny to cut music out suddenly, especially when it's like very serious and shit.
Oh, yeah, it's hard to fade, I guess.
Yeah. I couldn't on Bandcamp. I couldn't know how to fade it. Yes. All right. Welcome everyone to the Last Things live stream / podcast. You were just listening to Feast of the Epiphany, the new record Significance that came out earlier this year in February. Feast of the Epiphany is one of the many projects of Nick Podgurski, who is our guest today. I'm pumped. Old friend and collaborator in the past, probably in the future. And I hope. And yeah, man, welcome.
Thanks. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, man. What's I don't know. Yeah, let's start small. Start small. What's your day all about? What's the weekend all about? What's going on?
The weekend has just been, well, we were talking about this a little already, but doing some consulting. I was hanging out at my friend's record store earlier, and which I help out and teach there, and doing some consulting later on a project that I just started, looking at consulting with someone that does spatialization and designs equipment to do lighting and I think like, multi-speaker array sound spatialization stuff, just testing the waters to see if it's appropriate for something I'm working on with for September. So
sick. Is that under Feast of the Epiphany moniker or your own name? Or
it's a complicated answer, but I'm working on some music, and the nature of which will be a little TBD.
right.
And there's always a little bit of cross bleed because it came out of some people that I've worked with Feast of the Epiphany. But it's concurrent with rehearsing for Feast of the Epiphany is performing in Philadelphia, with KO Dot
That's right.
in September. And so as an aspect of preparation for that, there's new ideas kicking around. And so we're working on a couple of things simultaneously and just seeing what develops and where it needs to go.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the lines coming out of that I'm pursuing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, Feast is, I mean, I'm interested in, I don't know, getting into like the different, I like to start with the present. I don't know, because the Feast record came out. I don't know, like first listen, I was like, this is definitely my favorite Feast record. But then it's like, it's so different than the other. Like off the bat, it didn't even register as that different. It registered as like pretty different.
mm-hmm.
But I think that's just because I know you and your body of work and how you think about stuff, but then like listening to it more and more, I was like, wait, this is like really, really different than the old. At least it seems like a lot of people would take it like as a super different direction, like, I don't know, the monikers, like when you first started doing Feast, like that was like 10 years ago, right? Or like 12, 13.
More than that. Yeah. 2010, I think was the first. So 13 years ago, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, was that, is that, I mean, do you, like, what's the concept actually? Or has it changed, because like a name, for sometimes people have a name and it's like, that's just their name for them doing stuff. But then you have stuff under your own name, especially past few years, and then there's New Firmament. Like, yeah, I don't know. Is there a concept for aesthetically or?
Yeah, it's each album. There isn't one from the beginning. That the concept is that it's a vehicle for that moment with that group. And I would say that that means that it changes. And so it's changing and that is consistent, so how far back to describe this from? I'd say for significance, it was the easiest way to answer this is that the way that the creative process works for any one of these albums with Feast of the Epiphany is what's coming up in that moment musically and what's possible with that group. And so with significance, I had been working on some material that I didn't know what it was for. And I had been working on it since the earliest material from it was maybe as far back as 2018. And I wasn't sure, and this is often the case, it's just sort of documenting bits of things and ideas, and then something will reveal itself to be important, to be, it really like where it needs to go. We were just, this is the same thing that I'm speaking about with this concept of everything is always for me in the air, and being worked on. And so with significance, it was this notion we had just completed practicing loss. I know that I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but
no, let's jump around, man.
To answer that question succinctly is to say that it's just that there's change and the present moment with an ensemble.
Yeah, with an ensemble. Yeah, because that almost answers my, like, it's a band. I mean, I know that's like a reductive,
but I would say that there's a necessary transformation for each manifestation of it, which sometimes means that it's not a band, and it isn't clear what the leadership is always, and it needs to honor the moment of what the group is. And particularly, to speak about the earliest stuff, as far back as things that I think aren't even really around anymore. It's like I released this batch of songs in Divinity in 2010 or 11. And that was just material of like the first things that felt like they needed to happen coming out of pretty standard band experiences. I was playing in Yukon, and Yukon had ended. Yukon was this trio in Baltimore, which you know about. So,
yeah, the folks don't. I mean, the people listening. I mean,
yeah. So Yukon
do,
was a band that I played in from 2004 until 2009. And the final album came out after the band had ended in 2010. It was a short-lived like small scale cassette release. Damage Rituals had put it out, and
that's right. I remember.
so that band, I was primarily drumming, and by the end I was drumming and singing. And it had gone through several lineup changes and creative approach changes. So by the end, it was more of a collaboration with myself, Sam Garrett, who's a longtime collaborator, going way back from that band. He was the guitarist. I was drumming and singing, and a bassist, Brad Smith. And so with the final album, the last few years of that band, I started singing, and then it was becoming more composition minded. And so the decision to do music where I was overseeing the compositional process more started to really take shape there, rather than just collaboratively, collaborating and mostly approaching things from a drumming position.
Right. Like rock band collaboration vibe, versus a more like unusual form of collaboration, right? Like Feast, you're saying that gets very collaborative, but it's not like the standard rock, right, approach in a way, right? It's like,
well, and I mean, I'm sure that anyone this is maybe not new for anyone that's ever been in a rock band, but you quickly run into this notion that you have ideas, but it's stepping on the toes of others with ideas, and there's a need to negotiate how that proceeds. And it's often not discussed what the goal, like what the outcome that the group is aiming towards is, other than making a song or making an album. But there's so much more behind what motivates every member of the group to make music, especially at a young age. It's like, at least in the experience of Yukon, it's like you have people that are, we're 18 years old, and somebody likes it because it's fun, and then someone eventually wants to invest in a life in music, and so how do you reconcile those things? It's very different, and it's not usually addressed. It wasn't addressed in that case. So that kind of gave birth to this opportunity in Feast of the Epiphany to start exploring my own creative and compositional impressions or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and also as a vocalist, man, because like I remember, I mean, just like Yukon. I mean, to give people background, like that's I found out about you through Yukon. Ben Greenberg, who's now in uniform, and people know who he is. Yeah, he was just like, yo, check out this band Yukon. They're from Baltimore. Like, and specifically, he was like, their drummer is the sickest guy, and mentioned your name. Like that was like the like pitch of Yukon. And yeah, I mean, this was at a time. I mean, I talk about the aughts with people on the show, how it's like super complicated. I mean, fuck a genre label, but math rock. I mean, to an extent. I mean, just like as a shared pool of something. There was this kind of shared thing going on, and like I was playing in Z's, and everyone was, people were doing like really like rock based music that's super like has a million parts and is really complex and stuff. But it's like, I feel like singing wasn't a huge part of most of those bands. And so on that last Yukon record, where suddenly you're singing and you've got this like powerhouse voice that's just like, sounds like you've been singing forever, and it's just like, oh, like there was kind of like surprising, like everyone was just, I don't know, people like who were already into Yukon were like, oh my god, and then I didn't even mention to everyone, I mean, just like people who know, but I mean, we played an Extra Life together in the classic lineup, yeah, and then so Feast, you had already kind of like you already broken the seal of like you're a singer but then this was like your own thing, at least at that point, right? That was you as a singer and keyboard player. Like, I don't know, it was like these really like sudden, exciting, like, boom, I do this now, you know?
Yeah, well, even to say, it's like when the first recording was the kind of thing where I had suddenly come into some money because I was working a fair amount and wasn't touring, and just booked studio time and said, I'm going to go in and just create things. And there wasn't a lot of keyboard on that first record, which is kind of shelved away now, but I was writing from guitar and just experimenting a lot. And the keyboard came later. And then, yeah, it came out of this notion at the end of Yukon that I felt like I was stepping on the toes of the other two members having maybe too many compositional ideas. You know, there's a need to keep it balanced. And so I don't know that now in hindsight, I don't know what the right decision. I don't know. I wish I knew what the right decision always was, you know?
Yeah.
But it's like an interesting choice. And that's the choice that I made, was to begin composing on my own and figuring out what that was. You know, at the same time, I was performing in, you know, like in school and doing a lot of new music stuff too. So that was somewhere in the mix at that point. And it was just, and that's another funny thing where I was performing a lot, but never really exposed to what composition was or could be, but only through the lens of receiving compositions from other people. So this was this first strange foray into it. And so bringing that forward, it's just what it's developed into over time and what it's now become, what the theme of the project has become. Again, it's not just a mental concept. And I would say that that's really important to it. It's the physical and the emotional and the mental needs of the moment with a group or with an opportunity. And so with practicing loss, there was this notion of a handful of songs that I had been writing, and I had been working with Kaylee because it came on the heels of the heels and tail, the hails.
Infernal hails, brother.
Yeah. Douglas Hofstadter loves those things when you're like, you try to say two words and you get stuck and then you combine them.
Okay.
Like, you know that guy?
I don't. Who's that?
He wrote like Gurdjieff Escher Bach.
Oh yeah. Okay. I've had that recommended to me by you, actually. By other people as well. Yeah.
Anyway. So that kind of started at the end of practicing loss, began at the end of Extra Life. And what felt necessary there was looking at endings and losing things, and the reality at that point that I wasn't, you know, Yukon had ended, Extra Life had ended, my time in Baltimore had ended. And it became really interesting to take that on as a focus and to, I don't think I'm describing this now, but I wouldn't have described it at the time as being a kind of being receptive in a way to what comes rather than being active towards composition, which was to say that I had a bunch of ideas for songs and Kaylee and I would get together, but we didn't really have a third person. And it was waiting to see what would take shape and not directing traffic too much or, but playing. And so that became a running theme for, it took about 6 or 8 years before that was performed and released. We went through about, you know, the performed version of it was Kaylee Monahan Ward. So if people don't know, also because I can't tell who's on, so I feel like I'm just talking to you.
No, it's all different, you know. Yeah. No, I'll try to steer it based on who I think is checking it out. I mean, by the way, though, we're talking about Nick's Feast of the Epiphany record, Practicing Loss, right, which came out in like 2019, but it was kind of like a long time in the making. I mean, I kind of see that record as like a big, well, of course it's a big milestone because it was the first in a long time, right? But I mean, that like sums, it's sort of, like the sort of master work of this middle phase, you know, of Feast. and it's I'll play in the podcast version of this. I'll play a little bit of it. But quite. I mean, yeah, like the what was I going to say? I think like one of the hallmark, no, not a central thing, but something that is big about early Feast is that it's like very ornate, like structurally complicated music, which I don't know. I think a lot of I think there's something deep about the fact that that is a big element in it, but you're talking about how receptiveness and not pushing things around and being open to intuitive, stuff, how that's like a big driving force. That's probably a large part of why it can be experienced in ways that a lot of super complex music can't be experienced. I think probably there's some the fact that it's animated by a sort of non-neurotic, not forcing things current. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I've been more recently like reflecting on that material. I think that it's maybe the most direct expression of how I've experienced the world. I think maybe. Which is to say that there's a lot of information coming through, a lot of distortion, noise in the channel kind of thing. And there's a need to focus in terms of shapes, and focusing in shapes can still yield, if you want to call it complexity, it can still yield the same results, but to work in that way is very different than to have, notes on the page or to tell people what to do. And with that process too, I became really interested in, again, because this is what feels natural to me, is I'm going to summarily describe it as thinking in shapes, but it's working with someone. In the case of that, it's like working with Andrew Smiley, who I think really, to me, like really resonates with this way of thinking. You start to, but working with, using him as an example, but really anyone, over time, I start to get a sense for how a person creates, not what they create. And there's a sense of the rightness of of them being dropped into a setting, and it's like, okay, this is the scene, and I don't need to solve it granularly, but I can drop this person. I have the sense that this person being dropped in is the solution.
Yeah. I mean, it's like picking like an improvising, but I mean, it's like Miles picking people in the, although it's not improvised music, but this kind of,
I guess so. Yeah. And to take it further, it's to say that there's sort of learning that person's compositional voice and choices, and then them learning yours. And again, maybe that's just describing working with musicians in general, but that I don't think that or in my experience, that doesn't come from knowing or hearing someone play only, because what I'm speaking about kind of goes a little bit deeper than just like, oh, I know the choices this person makes. It's like, oh, it's like how they are. Sometimes what's right in a scenario is a way of being, not even having to do with the sounds that are being.
No, totally. I mean, that's why I'm like forcing this comparison, and this is not specifically what you're talking about, but there is this interview with Miles where like he's taught some, like I think it's with Bryant Gumbel, like in the 80s or whatever. It's really funny. But he's like, he's like, so how do you pick, you've had so many legendary musicians come through your band, how do you pick musicians? And he's just like, this is him really old in the 80s. He's just like, it's just about, the way they carry themselves, how they dress, how they hold the instrument. I mean, I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure that it's about how people play, but I just thought that was such a deep exaggeration of what you're saying, like an extreme exaggeration of what you're saying, where it's like, yeah, it's who people are, how they are existentially,
Sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, I think sometimes that's what's needed, and sometimes it's not. I don't know. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean, I think the what's cool to hear. I mean, to hear about how collaborative Feast of the Epiphany is. It's like it sounds like stuff that what you're doing is so intricate. It's like it's the kind of thing a lot of people would then from that standpoint tell everyone exactly what to do. So it's like, I think it's like I think a lot of the like the yeah, like I said, animated. It's like animated by the fact that you then are letting people be super collaborative on top of this thing that's already super dense, like.
yeah, I mean, I'm more interested in co-creation, and there is a need to understand like emotionally what's going on and what it's like what the vibe is or what we're after, but there's something more that I'm after, that it can't be expressed in words. And it's like, in some ways, this is funny to try to always express it in words. And that's how my inner compositional beyond compositional, this is how I think, is intuitive and in pictures. And so there is no way for me to articulate in language what is functioning inside doing the composing. And so there's it creates the necessity for a scenario to spend time with others to get this sense, this kind of inner visual sense of each other, to be able to wield from that place, because that's the only place that I can articulate it. And when I'm articulating verbally, I feel that usually to honor that image, there's a need to say something that orients a person towards the image, but in terms of language, it's an abstraction.
Okay.
And so I mean, I hope that this makes a little bit of sense, but it's wielding like, I feel like when the best I can do trying to bring these ideas to a group is to orient them towards the image of it, not to tell them what to do. And if I were to put the thing on paper, it would never be what the image of it is inside. And so I can see that there's a kind of loss there. And so I don't know. It's like one side of the coin is to approach it through making the attempt to orient a person towards the image of the
you're a visual artist. Another thing which I didn't actually mention when I was sort of like introducing so I mean this makes a lot of sense. And your visual art is, I don't know if people even use the word abstract anymore, but it's textures and shapes. What I've seen you do is not representational art. So it's like the shapes. That's like do the shapes go with the music to it in a direct way, or sort of not?
You're saying the drawings?
Yeah. The drawings that you do that are your flyers, album covers, that
do you mean specifically like the drawing for the cover of an album? Does that match?
Yeah. Like, does it?
I would say no.
Yeah,
not in the way I am presuming, not in the way that you intend it to be. It's not literal.
I meant literal, and I assumed you were going to say no, but I asked it anyway.
No, and that's but there's something elementally speaking in the background about it that connects it. And I think this is how everything is for me. And it's like I also made all these playlists for years, like hundreds of those through the New Firmament YouTube channel. And for me, it's like I can't not see these connective through threads in things, but it's not overt and it's not clear. And to put those things together for anyone else, I don't know that it's immediately connected, but that's what is the substance that becomes the source of the material for the material sound and source of harmony and what it's cast against.
Just everything you have going on in your life at a given point, or in the world, everything, it gets crystallized into what you're doing deliberately or not, you know. I mean, it's like records I made, I'm thinking, it's like I look back, it's like the apartment, the stuff I was eating a bunch, like really down, the day job I had, like, you know, it's like all in there.
Yeah, it's a
On purpose or not.
triangulation of the, I mean, there's the intellectual and the overt, you know, it's like the obvious in front of us, the, oh, I'm hearing drums and loud sounds, right? But then there's this there's an emotional impression of it, and the sensate impression of what we're taking in. And sometimes that's the memory, or that's the idea, the notion of how that feels. I'm really drawn to film in that sense, because that kind of triadic, you know, the image and dialogue and the sound all combined is a really nice way of representing all of those things. And I feel like with music, one thing that can be frustrating is losing that. It's losing that sense of it. And I think that's all. I
cinema.
Too deeply, which isn't to say that music lacks feeling, but it doesn't wield the same kind of emotional or sensate impression in the same way. And it's okay, and it does wield it in another way that's very effective, and I love that. But the thing that always speaks to me is something that's a little different.
You're talking about getting deeper into like lighting design and stuff like that. You know, you're getting outside of just pure sound. I'm interested though, but the thing is, you're a singer, or I mean a vocalist, as part of, you know, your work, and it's like so you do write lyrics, and you've been writing text this whole time, so you know, it's like that. I want to get into that a little bit, because also because the new Feast record, right? It's like, see, I think I overstated,
like dragging us to there, but this is no,
it's not, it's not, you know, this is, you know, I mean, I drag it around. I drag the pinball. I force the pinball to do anyway.
Writing lyrics.
Like the new Feast, I feel like I overstated how different it is at the beginning, in the sense that, see, for me, I guess I said this before, it's like, for me, I feel the through line fully. I think maybe as far as the type of attention that it requires, I think about this a lot with music now, just like what type of listening does it ask or invite of the listener? Not require, I don't want to say like music like demands, but like I don't know, the way I felt like I was listening to the new record, and my engagement with it was not super different from the earlier Feast. But I mean, like, sound wise, you know, so it's like, okay, like all the, you know, the classic Feast stuff had the big sonic through line through that was the Casio through a certain type of distortion. It's very harsh, right? And thick, right? So it's like, and there was and like intense throughout. And then the new material on Significance, right? It like does not have that. It's a lot more spare. There's quieter stuff. Your voice, so this is where I was going with this, is that your voice is so foregrounded in the new stuff. My first thought was like, oh, it's poppy, and then I'm like, no, pop is not the right word, but song. Yeah, your voice and the lyrics are really hang there, you know, out in the open. Like, I don't know, is that deliberate, or is that like is this coming to a new spot? Do you have a different relationship now with text or writing, or like, I don't know, you know?
Well, the needs are different for sure, but the process, at least for this one, was very similar, which is to say things are kind of all coming in out of, you'll love this because you're familiar with me using this term before. It's raisins in space, you know, but it's, you know, things, that's the experience. It's like this information that all is born of the same event, but not yet ordered. And so lyrically, the writing process is very much like that for me, where it's like the time period determines a lot of things, but it's also sorted through with the instrument of impressions, and impressions used as the instrument of organization, if that makes sense.
Like visual impressions, like visual images, or
impressions, or physical impressions, and kind of having this sense that navigating, like, okay, I've written this material. To describe it practically, it's like there will be just sessions and sessions of writing, and then things get taken apart and recombined in what feels like it makes sense to honor a musical idea. Often this is speaking more specifically about practicing loss, where I was writing lots and lots of lyrical content, and then dissecting and recombining it based on the emotional and physical, like, kind of sensate needs of the musical piece, just like what that felt like it represented in terms of language.
Okay. Yeah.
Again, it's like these words and this emotional content make sense together, because again, that's how it makes sense to me. It's that that's how the emotions make sense, not initially as a thought, but as I get it, and then I have to search for the words that articulate it. And so I'll have lots of these words that are about maybe the way I would imagine it's taking place is that I'm, speaking about, writing about the whole experience of everything that I'm working on to that point, and it's manifest in what's been written lyrically, and I have to sort of sift through where it's supposed to go, because I'm taking in the whole the entire batch of material.
Yeah. Because the lyrics, a lot of it has like a vibe where it's like it feels very personal and emotional, but not autobiographical and narrative. Like there's stuff about impressions, and yes, sensate. This is a word that I am hearing. It's like I'm like, yeah, this is really plugging into like this. I feel this. It definitely feels like it's coming from your own emotional states, but not getting into like, I woke up this morning, my baby left me, this is what's going on in life. It's like, it's not like that kind of, personal, but, and then I also hear there's like, I feel like some of the lyrics are talking about feeling emotions as well. Like there's some like processing, you know what I'm saying? Like talking about like, happiness can be born, like this thing of like almost like just like questioning what it means to feel something, what knowing is like, what it means to know something, right? I'm hearing that as well, like sort of like this other layer of you know what I'm saying? Like,
yes, I think that's valid. I think particularly with the interpretation of these, it's a means and a vehicle for everyone to have a unique interpretation. And even I myself at different times have a different interpretation. But the best I could describe them is they orient me towards this constellation that's been constructed in that moment, which is a constellation of these mental, emotional, and sensate impressions that can function as, maybe to put this in language, although I'm almost a little reluctant, it's like symbol in that sense. How one can interpret a symbol upwards, and a symbol keeps unpacking itself, not downwards, to that there is one meaning.
Yes.
This is a vehicle to be unpacked in all the ways that a symbol could function.
Yes. Yeah, it acts on you rather than just tells you something and X means Y. It's like activates, orienting. I mean, this Jung talks about this with symbols, strange attractors, and this kind of archetypes and stuff. Yeah.
And so to step into that and work from that place means a lot of unknowing, and non-clarity, and
Mhm.
trusting these and to orient. So also to say that the language that's used and the writing is precisely imprecise. It's a very specific ambiguity.
Mhm.
And so it's necessary because there's something else that's achieved. It's maybe a hope is to orient ourselves out of the duality of quantity. It's to say it's this or it's that, it's neither. And
Yep.
to find something that's beyond it and to invite in this something that's more, that permeates all of what's going on. A few minutes back, we were speaking about it, and it's to say you brought up, oh, well, since my baby left me type stuff. And I would say that any of those moments are more full than my baby left me. Anyone that's had an emotion knows that there's more experience, more contents of that experience than just that one was left. And so it never goes far enough to represent it in language, for me at least. And it's really beautiful when others can, but that's not how it comes in for me.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
this is what comes in.
I often think about, just like with lyrics, like how much room is left. It's not like for people, just, you know what I mean? And it's like, but what you're saying is there's always room, right? Even if it seems like there's no room left for people, like, but
Always room
just,
for, what do you mean?
I don't know, just for people to interpret things in different ways, and the ambiguity, like there's always that ambiguity, even when there isn't, or, even when it is like this direct narrative, it's like you're kind of saying, even if it's deep, if the lyrics are deep and then it always goes beyond, like there's always space and ambiguity there for things to go
Maybe,
upward rather than downward.
maybe. I mean, though, it's like the greatest lyrics could fall upon poorly, or not even poorly. The greatest lyrics could fall upon music that doesn't serve the idea, or maybe the idea is just to serve the lyrics, but that's never. That's not what I'm interested in.
No, for sure.
Is having lyrics and music that serves it, or at least to say that's not what I was interested in terms of like practicing loss. It's not at all how I was approaching it. And to say that there's been a shift into trying what hasn't been tried, what I haven't tried, and to try and orient myself differently for significance, to speak about that process a little more was, we had worked in this really long form, highly something, whatever you want to describe this as, for about 6 years. We went through 8 different bassists, one of which was you. There's one note that you contributed to practicing loss, and it's a Picardy third. I thought you should know that, which is so.
Did I call it that in the
No,
rehearsal, or you did?
But so so we went through 8 different bassists. None of the music was notated, and that was very much a part of the process, was to not notate anything. I ended up playing bass on the recording.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
I wrote all of the bass parts, and it was through the process that it was only through the process that I realized I was hearing a lot of like what do you call that, like figured bass, like function in terms of the music, and I didn't realize that it was there.
Right.
For me. And so I'm really grateful to everyone that was a part of that process of me probably being a pain.
I didn't, even though I did not work as the bass player, I did not find you a pain whatsoever. But it's funny though, what I think one of the reasons I was the wrong guy for that is that I remember you being very open. You were like, so yeah, like what are your ideas? And I'm like, literally my idea is to double exactly what you're doing. Like, that's what, you know what I mean? I was like, I would do that. And so it's like, kind of like, I'm not really contributing an idea, but it was almost like this, like top-down composer vibe. Like, you know what I mean? I was like, on your behalf, I'm like, you already have told me what to do, and I want to just take those instructions rather than, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like a funny, like, I've never been in that position where someone's like, what's your idea on this? And I'm like, I shouldn't add one. That's my opinion,
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. It's like we all participate in this triad of offering a thing and not offering a thing. And I don't know, it was really weird to me at that point in time the idea of needing to be told by virtue of a composer or sheet music what to do, and to separate ourselves from what drives us. And this is, again, touching on a little bit of that. I know we're speaking more about practicing loss at the moment, but touching more on that notion of like, what is creative in us? That's interesting to me. And how are the different ways we can plug into that creativity? And is it always an affirming drive to do things? Is it always that I need to do X? And one can be creative through other courses of action. And we fall into this. I feel that there's in Western training, it's like the roles are that I am told what to do by the person. You and I were speaking about this kind of recently, but to say it again, it's like it's very often the roles are that there's a composer and the person is told what to do, or there's improv and there's not being told what to do, but there's the right thing and the wrong thing. And I'm really interested in how far that can go, to break that down to the point that, it's I'm just interested in how far that can go. I have a notion of what it going far is, and in fact, even that would be rigid and incorrect, because it's truly an unknown. And I want music to go to that. I want music to take me to that place in my personality, which isn't to say that I want music to sound like something no one's ever heard. Is that I want to use music as a vehicle to break down who we think we are, so that we can access more of ourselves. There's something that's able to be in when we're creating. And it's interesting to me to use music and the creation of it as the vehicle for that.
Yeah. I mean, that thing of like a composer top down notating every note and handing it to players. I mean, I think that is crumbling. I mean, not dramatically and rapidly, but that's being taken apart, I think, even within the world of so-called classical music. I mean, you have plenty of people still doing that, and that's considered valid. But I think I think nowadays it's like, it's we were talking about this over coffee a couple weeks ago. Like, I mean, I don't think it's not standard practice yet within classical music to do what you do in Feast, where you have your part like totally worked out, but other people are really invited to write their entire parts. Like, that's not really happening, much, but I think it's going that way. I mean, I think like in 20 years, if you go see International Contemporary Ensemble or like one of the, like that will be, because they're bringing in improvisation more, even free improvisation, etc. It's like what you're talking about. It's funny because what you're talking about, though, that time approach, there are these economic concerns, man, because it is like the approach that you're talking about is like it's really time inefficient. And I mean that as praise. Like, you know what I mean? It's like not like this vibe of like, okay, let's get this. Here's the most efficient way to get music done. It's like very like social and ongoing, which requires this sort of trust and love and, stuff that like is, you can't always count on that, in some like classical music world stuff. But it'd be sick if there's more of it, if that becomes like you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think music at its core is something that's very separate from social reality, and that's to say that social reality is not reality. And these things that are economic concerns and how we can as musicians have an industry that we participate in, or make money from what we do, or offer our time to these things. These are all really superficial concerns of ours in life as humans that, were born of sperm and seed, and egg, and grow up to serve some purpose here. And I would say that plugging into purely spending a life putting these things together and doing that in a way that feels fulfilling in and of itself feels good and proper to me. And all the other stuff is no doubt its economic decisions hamper it, but I think that those are no longer music, and it's really important for me to separate those two things. And it means that, you know, a lot of the stuff that, you know, in order to function in those systems of, and I kind of mean like systems in the science term, you know, like it function in the systems of economy or the systems of industry. It's like it's a different thing is needed, and that's very real, but it's very important to understand that that is no longer music. And I think the cultural currency of music is most people, musicians included, of incorporating the concerns of those secondary systems as a part of the process. And incorporating those so far that we've conflated those with music, and it's not the same thing.
Well, it's like, I mean, yeah, it's like if you're doing this kind of process, I mean, basically you just need to have everyone be equally down with the project. I mean, everyone has to be like equally invested in it. However, the number of ideas end up breaking down, you know, rather than I mean, rather than this sort of like this like efficiency thing of like the way classical music, you know, it's like, I mean, that thing of composer, like, yeah, it's very based. Yeah. I mean, the thing of a composer writing out every note and then people just playing it. Yeah. I mean, it's economic in the sense of, not economic in the sense of people trying to make money as a career in music. I mean, economic, like an institution can fund this because it's efficiently getting it done. You know what I'm saying? Like,
no, and this isn't to twist your words or suggest that you're suggesting that it's economic in that way, but it's to me, it's that our mindset as a culture is that, well, music is a thing that if I don't have time, I don't need, and it doesn't serve a purpose. Or, you know, there's all this stuff that music is culturally hidden behind now. It's behind paywalls and behind just the notion that like most platforms have an ad. It's something I think about constantly, is the experience of an entire generation, at least, of music, is that in order to touch base with it as a medium, an ad has to be endured.
Yeah.
And if not that, the way to find out about it is through an advertising platform, which essentially is social media. And again, this is this means of like, this is this superficial thing imposed on sound. Someone said this, I can't remember where it's from now, so these are not my words, but someone was describing music as sound coming into contact with the soul. Right? And so on that level, there's that, and then there's just all this other stuff. And it's a real sadness that an entire generation, you know, we're being forced into this, and we who have already been in touch with music, we find all these workarounds to function within it and to call out problems within it and respond to problems within it. But if we were to use a metaphor of like the ego and like our personalities, because I know that you know that sort of a thing, you know, it's like our own egos responding to itself, you know, not actually solving a problem. You know, it's like we've learned to have these side habitual reactionary patterns to this thing that's really our ego not changing, not shifting, not being immovable and intact and reactionary. And we develop this secondary reaction to it. And so that's to say that I think that in terms of music industry, that we're constantly being forced to create these secondary reactionary positions, and we're spent at the most practical way I can say it is that that's where we're putting our energy. Yeah. How much energy do I have to spend writing an artist bio, telling someone about music I've made? This is not to speak about this because this is real dialogue, which is truly valuable. But I mean, writing a CV, you know, and collecting these things in order to get a grant, in order to go to a place, and only then come into contact with what music actually.
No, there is this issue of time and energy that, even if you're able to make music in a way, even if the source of what you're doing is not coming from these practical instrumental concerns, even if it is coming from something far more sacred and pure, you only have a certain amount of time and you only have a certain amount of energy. And if I spend 2 hours doing an artist thing, I mean, that's 2 hours that you're not communing, with these higher things. It's like, I mean, I'm trying to get more organized in the sense of just like putting time limits on how much I'm willing to grind. Just grind as far as instrumental calculations of, like just sprucing up this YouTube thumbnails, like all this shit, although some of that is creative and aesthetic as well. But things that things that are not deep to me that I have to do to just like get the shit out there. I think it's good to like come up with just like a limit. I'm going to do this for an hour and a half. Yeah. And then it's done. I'm going to write music after this and to actually play the guitar.
Yeah. It's, and like, that's necessary. And what's really important though is, and again, I see this as crucial to people that are people that are growing after us, coming up, is that's not music.
Yeah.
Period. Isn't. It's talking about it, but it's not. There's nothing. We can sit here, we could sing together right now, and at any given moment, I can hear a sound and try and match that sound and make music. And there's just an unfolding world of meaning and rich, impactful possibilities from that. And that's not how we see music. That's not culturally how music is, at least to say in what I'm experiencing, Western culture, this hyper specific experience of it. And we need to get out of that. I think it's really important too, to look at outside of the epoch of time that we live in, beyond recorded history of what music has been and all of the permutations and what it can possibly manifest as.
No, I mean, I think about this a lot just with people. Like I'm like, you got to remind people what music it's been in every human culture since the dawn of time. It's been, people live and die by this religion, wedding marches in ancient Egypt, stuff we don't even know about. And it's just like, so it's just music business stuff. It's like, you've been around for like what, 150 years tops, music industry. Like, we are not the same. Like, it's like, but yeah.
Well, and even that, it's like music. We are ones, even as musicians, to talk about the depth of music. And sometimes music is not deep. And sometimes a thing needs to die in order to become deep again, it needs to become shallow, and it's like really coming into contact with what music is to come into contact with all its permutations. And to say that, I don't know, but there's this notion that things are dying right now and going through this thinning out period. And that doesn't mean that music goes away, but it goes into this period where there's a necessary dying that's taking place, and we can still make music. And that's what's the heartening part, is this superficial form that we're, to me, I have this clear image of, at a base level, this is what music is. And when we're speaking purely in this, this firmament, just to be punny, of industry and superficial social reality. And that's primarily what we usually discuss. And it's terrifying. And that could even be, that same picture could be represented as like the essence and the personality of humans, right? Or I'm sure there's, other terminology depending on the system that we're talking about. But just to speak about that as an image, I think that something needs to die here. And it's very necessary and important. And this doesn't go away. And at any moment we could literally pick up anything and be making music and creating it, and to learn to give currency to that as fulfilling, important, heartening, expressive, and that's the attitude and the orientation I'd like to plug into more of as best I can.
I mean, I use the word sacred, man. I mean, because just to me, it's like, this has religious overtones, which I'm not in any way allergic to, but whatever, some people are. Yeah, just the sense of that there, when you said music will still be there, it's undying. I mean, the idea of anything being eternal and immovable and sacred and sovereign, it's something that you just cannot fuck with. It's like, that's actually just really out of style culturally. I mean, it's just like, it's like, okay, so we don't all agree on God. God doesn't exist. Okay, the king doesn't exist anymore. It's like, okay, cool. But so what are we left with? You know what I mean? And it's like, there's this, I feel like most people, there's this assumption, there's this implicit assumption that we can live meaningful lives without a sacred, without the idea of something that is like the way you're talking about music and the way I look at music, which is being like a sacred thing that will be here after X, Y, and Z thing dies. It's like you cannot live life without you can, but you're going to live in hell if you don't have some sense of that in something, whether it's music or something else, right? I mean, I can't, like, it's literally just being based in like a something deeper than life, like I don't just like rooted in some way,
Maybe, yeah. It's the image that comes in is, again, these two pictures. I've got this picture, right, and that we are. What's the easy way to say this? Is
doesn't have to be the easy way to say it. We can go
the
hard. Go hard mode. Go hard mode.
Speaking about the sacred, and speaking about even when we describe how we define the sacred is here, and there's something that's beyond it that's here, and there's just a necessary there's a necessary letting go of whatever this represents to anyone in their life, to realize that this is always here and accessible. And as an example, like, here is where things are interesting, and here is where stuff's interesting, and here is where it's so simple. I don't know, as a culture, that we're really interested in it, because it's in some ways it's so, it's outside of what our personalities, the realm of our personalities ping-ponging around. And so here is where, this is who I am, this is what's sacred, this is what isn't, and it's all very dual. We've got, it's this or it is or it isn't, and we are, we're really decided and stuck. And there's this whole other world that's outside of it to let go of. And for some reason, this keeps coming in. It's like, there's this notion of like, I'm thinking about some random David Foster Wallace comment on like, through the obsession with postmodernism, we've lost sincerity. And this isn't to like quote him endlessly or something, but this notion of that postmodernism, we'll use that as just an entry point to this. And we'll say that here is where I mostly experience in the world existing, that things have to be exciting, and we've decided what's exciting and what's not, and what's interesting and what's not.
Right.
This is, to me, boring. And sincerity, to me, exists here.
The boring shit is deep.
Sincere is really difficult for us as a culture now.
Yeah.
And being really sincere, because what crops up is quote unquote like sincerity prime, or sincerity with like a drop shadow, or
sincerity TM, right? I mean, sincerity.
That's, and we all can think about that individually as what it is, and have our own version of how we're manifesting that. But we know that there's this thing that it's not quite the real.
Yeah, well, sincerity also, like a lot of the time that's when people use that word. It's like it's still ego based, even if you're sort of not being even. There's yes, there's a vulnerability to being sincere, but you're still talking about you. Like you're still just being like, I'm sincerely experiencing X, Y, Z, which is different than that's more sincerity TM or whatever than you're talking about this more boring. I love the I love the use of the word boring for deep shit, because I don't know, it's like I used to talk about that with Chuck Stern, like when he would be like, dude, this part is so boring, dude, check it out, it's like the most boring thing, like, but meaning it like yeah, it's like an undistracted sort of pure zone. And I think there was some John Cage quote. Someone was just like, I think he was like, if you listen to something and it's boring, keep listening, It's not right. Right. Go deeper. Yeah.
If you listen to it one time, listen to it 100 times. If you find it boring, listen to it 100 times.
Yeah.
And there's a few things to say there. It's like the question that comes up is what in me tells me that something is boring? What part of myself? And where do I create music from? And is it that part of myself that tells me things are boring? Or is it the part of myself that's a little more inaccessible? There's who I am when I'm aware. I mean, it's like, even this is an example. It's like I can be aware that we're on a call and we can talk one way, and then there's a different way that I am when I'm not on a call, or giving a public speech, maybe a better example. It's like we're a certain way, and then we're a different way, and setting the conditions to be a little more open to that, and creating from that place is important to me. So to bring it back to like significance, it's like very much about setting conditions and working with what manifests in them. So with that record, there's every track is an entirely different band, and it began from an entirely different materiality, an entirely different thing, for so to speak very specifically about a few tracks. There's the opening track that we opened with today. It's like that I pretty much had all the, I wrote all the way through. There were keyboard parts, vocal parts, and it was like, okay, well, this is how this manifests, right? And I think to make a comment on that, most of us come to, through most of our, intense experience of here for all of our lives, we come into contact with, that's the only way to create, to be creative, period. It's like you have the whole thing. We're the composer, we're the genius, we're very specialized. That's a big attitude. It's like, I don't know if you're familiar with like Buckminster Fuller, operating manual for Planet Earth, or you know what I'm talking about.
I actually have not read any Buckminster Fuller, and I do want to get into talking about some of your philosophical touchstones, because I know you're deep on Buckminster Fuller. I know you're deep on Gurdjieff. I definitely want to pick your brain. I mean, if you're down, yeah. But yeah, sorry, keep going though. Yeah.
But so it's we mostly experience that, and and as briefly as I can with the Fuller, it's like he always riffs on this. And I'm no expert by any means, but it's of interest to me, his riff on specialization, and that rather than knowing about the world broadly, we've come to value, and he gives really specific, cultural and political examples of why we've been specialized into topics. I'm a musician, you're a mathematician, and there's no sense of breadth, and that's used for types of political power. But for me, that attitude of specialization, it's at the core of our education. It's at the core of all of the thisness. There's the music industry, and there's all of these things that exist here. If you take any one of them, you can see that they've been burrowed. It's conical.
Yeah. Expertise, the cult of the expert. Yeah.
And so we've burrowed ourselves into that corner of that room that you played in that time in Denver, Colorado. I don't remember anything about that story other than that you said there was a room that came to a point in the corner.
In Denver? Wait, when was it?
Just pre-Rhinoceropolis. I remember you having some, like, you were like, we played in a venue, and there was just like the room came to a point in the corner. It was
oh
like,
my God, how do I not remember that? So that must have been with Z's.
Probably not important. That's the only but so anyway, so to come back to this notion, it's like that's the attitude that we've been taught, and it's easy to say, if I've only written the first track of significance and I've done it in that way, that I can't be creative until I can recreate that.
Right. You're like, that's the way I do. Right. Like, that's my process.
And it's not even me specific. It's just like generally, like that's the function. So move on with this. It's like being interested in what other forms of creativity there are. So a track like Holding Life is an interesting example, which is one of the later tracks on the record. Was a series all the way through composed, a series of piano chords and their whole notes. And they were documented with a click track, and that's it. And it was about however long the song is, 3 minutes of whole notes on piano, which I sent to a drummer. And I described a vibe and said, can you record drums to this?
Okay, I know the track you're talking about. Yeah.
And so the notion was, I knew what made sense to me was how in space I wanted those moods represented by those chords, and how those chords to function, like in terms of like temporally speaking, I knew how I wanted them to be in time. But the rest of it didn't need to be clear. Right. And I wanted to stop myself there to invite in what else is able to be.
Yeah. Like you had no need to like identify with the process that you wrote. The first track, you're like, oh, I do it that way. You're like, no, this next thing requires that you just have a completely different approach. And there's no like, I'm the expert on this way of doing. I mean, this is what makes artist statements so hard, because people are like, easy if you're like whatever certain type of artist, if you're the type of artist that's more a bureaucrat than an artist. I'm not trying to name names, but cats are out there. But like, yeah, like that vibe where you're like, I'm interested in X, my work deals with, and you're like, they just do the room in Denver that just goes to a point, and that's, you get the grant money because someone's like, oh yeah, that's a really compelling little niche that you're the expert on, that you made up, and now you're the expert. And it's a lot harder to like whatever, like it's kind of deeper to just be like, each time, what does this need? Like, well, each time,
but to say it's like, that's the necessary key to that lock for that, the grant writing thing, It's like, that's what one has to bring oneself to do to access that. And yet it's music, it's in and of itself, and creation in and of itself works all these other ways, and so it's like, okay, well, maybe again, because it's not to be negative about that stuff. It's easy to get negative about that stuff.
I was being negative. Yeah.
It's just like, that's how that functions. Well, I'm not just, it's not like I've never had a negative feeling in my life, but it's to say, it's like, well, that's just how that functions. That's the lock. It's like, this is the water and this is the well, this is the lock and this is the key, and so that's how that functions. But so to say, it's like with this specific track, then the drums came back, and then hearing the drums only through that were the sections more clear, and then new ideas were clear. And so it's to look at like this notion of, like this triad, just to talk about it briefly, of like, something activates, something denies, and something reconciles ideas and the creative process, and we can enter through any of those points with any activity. And so in that regard, it's like, what comes out of hearing the drums and responding to them is very different than what I would write generating the idea of any other parts to just whole notes on,
Yeah.
or to say someone else adding whole notes on piano to finish that thought, to stay a little bit clear here. Or that's quite different from what I would write as a drum part, being the person that, and I think, again, trying to speak a little less abstractly, more practically, it's like, it's very clear when you hear someone who's written someone's music who's written all the parts, there just is a clear sense of that it's the same. And I think here we use it to call it vision, but there is a sense of like, it's all one person's idea and other people pushing it forward. Mm-hmm. And when something's, you know, here, or a little more, maybe this is no longer the metaphor and it's more about like the triad in this instance, you know, but it's like, it's kind of a straight line. Like you can get a sense. I said that I was going to be more succinct. I lied.
It's all right.
But it, you know, it's like when you hear someone that's written all the parts and other people are performing it, and you kind of get the sense of their voice being manifest in every single player's writing.
Oh, I know.
When you,
I know all about it.
Versus when it's many people's input, like our own input gets modified, and that has this potential to make something that was previously impossible possible, or previously unknown, or just it really creates this potential, and it's a big risk.
You were talking with that you were talking about triad a couple times. Where you said something, denying, and then reconciling. What was like the first one?
Affirming, denying,
denying, regrets. I mean, that's, you know, that's pure Hegel, right? I mean, you a fan, or you fuck around?
I don't know much Hegel.
I mean, that's just like a thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You know, so it's like driving, like, and then the synthesis becomes the new thesis. So it's like, the thesis is like the nobility, and then the antithesis is like, I don't know, I guess like a rising merchant class, or I guess, and then the synthesis is like the new bourgeois class, and then like shit like that, and then you know, I guess that's how Marx spun it. But yeah, I mean, this thing, like triangulation. I mean, it sounds like that's dialectics, right? It sounds like you like the dialect, like being negated is part of the next affirmation, right? Is to have, I mean,
well, I don't necessarily know that, and I don't know it in that way, so I can't say that I agree or disagree.
Yeah, it just reminds me. That's all.
But the way I understand it, it's like it's very easy to step in, to exist in this polarized, just being stuck in a loop of affirming, denying, affirming. It's like we have an idea, or we do its opposite. Or, you know, I don't like this thing that I did before, so now I'm doing the opposite. Or I liked that thing, so I'm doing it again. And we always play this role, and we kind of live on that line, you know, point, line, plane as a concept, right? Like we live on that line between these two poles of I'm doing it, or I'm not doing it, you know. And we create this notion that creation is between those two poles, two-dimensional.
So is that kind of like is that partially to say that like the vibe of like the affirmation and then the denial that's fertile for you, that like that doing the polar opposite of the thing that's affirmed, that's not real denial, like that's not the deep denial. It's just too dual. Like
they're two ends of the same stick. You know, if one looks at like Buddhism, there's lots of there's duality is this major construct, and we end up in these dualities. You know, it's I do this or I do the opposite, and there's something else that brings us out of the construction that it's, you know, one or the other. And you know, in some ways I find this represented in the notion of like reconciling the quantitative and the qualitative in music, you know, or it's like there are these things that can't really be held together by one another's terms. They have to be reconciled through something else. Does that make sense? You know,
you're saying you don't like the idea that these things that No, not, were you saying that there's that people have a false idea that certain things can be reconciled and they shouldn't be thinking of things in that way, or
things can be reconciled, but only through something else coming in that we can't see.
Okay. Yes.
And, and in a way, to speak about it crassly, again, there's not a real clear way to speak about it, and it's that.
Yeah. No, I understand. Like real difference, like something that is like fundamentally different from whatever duality you're looking at. The things aren't going to be reconciled from inside.
Yeah,
each other or whatever.
Bateson, the difference that makes a difference.
Wait, say that again. Who?
Gregory Bateson. The difference that makes a difference.
I don't know. No.
Or like David Bohm. It's like there's he speaks about the differences are now different. It's like something that comes in to transform a paradigm. And I'm using paradigm to speak of duality, so I should just say duality. Yes. But there's something that comes in to transform that duality, transforms the differences. It goes from 2 dimensions to 3-dimensional. It goes up a world or up a level in some sense. And so, it's like we're speaking really loftily, but it's like the notion of creation still happens wherever that duality is, where whatever's coming in, creation can there's still this third thing that is that we can surrender ourselves to and have it come in and engage with. And so and so it now sounds corny to speak about it in terms of that track or something, but it's like approaching composition from these different ways. It's like, I know what it's like to have the idea and just have the people perform it. But what is it like to be open and allow the idea to come through others and to have me honor what they bring and to start participating in different roles around this triad, And so that one was, we're Holding Life. It was 4 minutes of whole notes. Cameron adds a bunch of drums, and suddenly the entire form it makes sense. And what was written absolutely would not have been what the part was prior to that.
Yeah.
The title track, Significance, a similar but different kind of thing. There's an organ part that goes throughout the entire song, and that's the only thing that was written to start. And it was collaborated with primarily that one was with pianist Matt Canelos, who is phenomenal. And
he is phenomenal, because you have that it sounds improvised, right? You and him.
So,
and that's I hadn't checked that out until I started catching up on your recent stuff. He's awesome.
Matt he's one of the most inspiring, phenomenal, sensitive, just all around incredible. I mean, humans, but musician as well. And so, on that piece, it was, I had a sense that piano was what would work. It's like just this intuition that piano was what was needed for this organ part. That was the whole structure of the song, and none of the other synthesizer sounds, none of the drums, nothing, no lyrics, none of that existed. Often the lyrics, I think pretty much across the board with Significance, no lyrics existed until it was the last stage. Even the writing process of the lyrics is the last stage, because that makes sense to me, where I'm sort of responding lyrically to this thing, because again, that's how cognitively I kind of experience the world. I experience it first as this picture, and then I've got to put it into words. That's the only way that that's the temporal placement of language in the process for me. So Matt steps in, and he recorded this piano improvisation, which he then learned, because he had done it on I mean, again, Matt, phenomenal. He improvised his way through it, but he had used like an electronic sounding piano, and just like for mixing purposes, it didn't, I had kind of imagined a grand, but also it was like a more challenge to mix it in. So he then went back and learned his entire improvisation
Yeah.
and performed it again. And
Yeah.
then we performed
Bonkers.
in March, and he had again just relearned the whole improvisation, and it's phenomenal. But
That's nuts.
and that's the isness of the piece, is his it's like, and again, it's this kind of like, the way it makes sense to me to speak very like coarsely, grossly, but it's like this somehow makes sense with this idea of triadism that we've been talking about. I'm using that term. It's not a term necessarily.
Yeah.
I don't mean it specifically, but it's like there's this kind of like which end is up or who's on first when ideas are coming in for me when I compose. And it's like, well, this is an idea, and I think in the past it's easy to, I feel like any songwriter has this relationship of like, this is the chorus of the song, and then it's like, no, it's not. And in fact, it's the verse to a better chorus, and that's the first step of to me, a really important skill set to learn is like letting go of the idea, kill your darlings or demo love or whatever you want to manifest it as. But to take that this step further, it's like sometimes the idea, we need to be able to relax. Now we're coming back here, it's like we're up here when we're focused on what that thing is, and we need to, what part of me has decided that's what it is. Can I let go of that a little bit? What else can happen if I ease up and just enter into a process taking place? And so to say, it's like with that, it started out with this organ patch, this organ piece, and I gave it to Matt. And then as what Matt offered, just it was now something very different. And everything else, all of the other instrumentation just fell into place from that, and again, there's a type of like triangulation that takes not from that first spot. And it's not to say that it's impossible to complete the process, maybe it's a different triad if I were to hypothesize, but I shouldn't overthink,
if you're going to hypotenuse that shit.
Yeah. But it's to say that, something else is possible, and I'm really interested in that in music. And
I think this thing with like opposite, I mean, a lot of the time with dualities, like I do kind of enjoy like I like notice things in art that like could be a dual, like noticing the duality that's already been reconciled and is no longer a duality, like, but just like being like, oh yeah, this could have been a duality in the thing, but it's not. And I wouldn't off the bat, like just in thinking about it, like, like, so just like with your music, like Feast throughout the entire, no, actually not Feast, taking it as whole Feast, Stuff Under Your Own Name, and New Firmament. It's like on paper or like by all rights, complexity in the sense of a lot of notes and stuff not repeating and stuff, that is quote unquote the opposite of like ambient music or drone music. But in your stuff, that opposite, it's like there's almost like those never feel pitted against each other, because it's like there's some third triangulated thing that's just making that duality not even a thing. Like I didn't even really think of that as being two opposites in your work until trying to think of like, okay, what are the intellectual things that I'm going to notice about Nick's work? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like sort of forcing, like noticing dualities. So I think that's sort of maybe like there's some, I think there's some stuff about, like you're talking about shapes, right? Like a lot of the stuff that's quote unquote complex in your music, or stuff that a person would use the word complex to describe, prog or whatever, like stuff that doesn't repeat, that's like, rhythmically, like very active, it's like, you think about it as shapes. It's like, oh yeah, like that stuff is like shapes. And then in the more ambient stuff and the more drone based stuff, when you sit with that and exist in it over time, there are also shapes in that. They're smaller shapes. I don't know, maybe they're not as brightly highlighted, or, maybe you have to look a little harder because they're, but it's like, like that's the kind of thing where it's like, clearly to you, these are not opposite things. It's like, it's coming from a very, So I mean, maybe that's part of the reason why I think people can appreciate the really complex feast stuff without being people who sweat that kind of issue. You know, people who aren't like prog rock heads or whatever can feel the shapes, and that it's, you know, that it's not about a million notes. It's not what is driving it at all. You know.
Well, you know, existence is complex. You know. In addition to our favorite crowbar, that it's also
complexity is punishment.
Yeah, but existence is complex, and it's to say that we take these things for granted, and our sense of contact with just waking life is that way. You know, that we take for granted the totality of things, and we can, you know, bandy the words around like ambient music to imply a type of simplicity and a type of contact that we're giving to it. What kind of attention do we give to music? Even complex music, we can give poor attention to.
Yeah.
And we can, and it can be made from those places, you know, and again, we're kind of back here. This is like, maybe we've changed it from personality and depth, but like there's this, you know, superficiality, and then there's this like other thing. You know?
By the way, for the audio listeners of listening on the audio podcast, we've been doing a lot of up here versus down here visualizing on the YouTube. So the YouTubers.
My suggestion is that when you edit this for the audio podcast, is that you create two tones, and every time I'm up high, there's a little ping, and then every time I'm down low, there's a pong.
Yeah.
So people will know that there's a high and a low gesture being done by my hands.
This is one of these jokes that's a great idea, and time permitting, I probably should do that. And then, you know, and then it's a whole nother direction for the podcast where I do sounds, and then it's just the whole like,
You now have, this is where you start scoring your podcast, your own podcast.
Well, this is, I mean, people who do that, you know, there's folks who do that, and it's pretty sick. It does take podcasting to more of an art form, which I do not consider this art, you know.
I meant it more in the terms of like converting Eddie Murphy's speech patterns into saxophone microtonal parts. You know?
You know what I'm you use. All right.
So, where were we when we left that? We were talking about the high and low. I remember my gesture, but I don't remember. And I remember I was leaving this sense of essence and personality, but I forget the subject of what I was speaking
about. I was talking about complexity and how it's not separate, you know, in your work from simplicity.
Yeah, and so it's to come into contact with a you know, there's this deeper attention that we can give when we listen, you know, and when we create music, and it's available. There's much sound is much much larger than we realize, even as we're taking it in. And I don't mean that I mean that in a very literal, fundamental, essential, elemental sense, that there's, you know, there's more there than we're connecting to, than we're giving attention to. Mm-hmm. And we're connected to it, but we're not giving necessarily attention to it. And, you know, it's like, how often can we pay attention to the sensation in our body as we're listening to something, and be with what it feels like to physically come into contact with what we're hearing? How often are we in touch with not just what we're hearing, but what we're feeling? You know, are we present with our feelings while we're taking it in? You know, and generally speaking, we're taking in sounds, and it's ambient and it's simple, you know, and it's like to come into contact with, you know, to come into contact with a type of sensitivity, with a type of sensitivity that changes how we experience an ambient piece, you know, can really transform what we would describe it as, whether or not we would describe it, ambient music, as simple or complex.
Right,
you know?
right.
And we come into contact with a whole other set of qualities that are existing in that moment that we were unable to access and see are there. You know, it's like we can often hear it's like you can hear an ambient piece and be like, oh, okay, it's a pitch, you know, or we can really come into contact with it and hear how, you know, effects or things are moving around and invest our attention there and
Yeah.
invest our attention into what the sensate impression of that is. And
Yeah.
similarly with complexity, we can really take things in just through the head, you know, we're just thinking about it,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like, what is it like to not think, you know, because you were speaking a bit about this juxtaposition of like complexity and whatever. And for example, earlier distorted era Feast of the Epiphany.
I was going to bring that up.
One of the questions with that was like, what is it like to take in like things that are complex, not as an idea, but just as an experience in the body, and to arrive at a similarly complex result, but to enter into it through something that's, in one sense, it's like, I shouldn't say coarser, but it's like, it's different. It's qualitatively a different experience to know something through the body than it is through the emotions or through the head. Arrive at complexity through sensate impressions, or to arrive at complexity through emotional impressions. What is that like?
Yeah. I think with that, what I was gonna say, you brought it back to early Feast with the keyboard. That I feel like that music, the fact of the very consistent and intense sound of that synth throughout that stuff is like not just, I mean, you know, this is obvious, but I mean, just to tell you that I know, just that's not like just like, oh, well, that's a cool sound, and then you're writing cool stuff with that sound. It's like the whole poetics of that to me is like the way you're talking about experiencing complexity in the superficial sense of complexity, like a lot of notes, a lot of rhythms, like experiencing that differently, not through the head, but through the body. I think that consistent sound, that sort of monochrome vibe of gluing everything together with that sound, invites the listener to experience the complexity in a more physical or sensate kind of way. Because it's almost like there's this overall, like, very visceral, especially like live, like, you know, like that, just, it's so overtone rich and like like gritty, and like you know, that it's like it takes you to this place to like it like subverts the sort of the someone's natural habit of listening to all the rhythms and being like, ooh, proggy, cool, you know. It sort of disarms people and kind of gives this feeling of like it's less precious and fussy, you know what I mean? It makes it like, this is, the word organic is like, that doesn't mean anything anymore, but like I don't know, it ties it in with drone the attitude that like when people listen to drone music or ambient music, they like come into it with a certain set of ears. So it's like, I feel like just that early Feast stuff, it's like you kind of like disarm that type of listening and the prog rock kind of listening. Mm-hmm. You know, like the keyboard sound is a big part of that to me.
Yeah. You know, you said the word drone and it triggered this whole thing. It's like our associations with language. It's like we can say drone and it's like, oh, it's a single note, you know, and a single note is made up of all of these partials that we're able to access and able to focus on, and, you know, and able to bring forward. Sorry, I'm thinking about like 5 trajectories of like what to talk about, because I really like, remind me to come back to this idea of foreground and background, because it's been a really useful metaphor. But you know, it's like we can say the word drone and we're like, oh, it's a pitch, and everything's centered around a pitch, and nothing in Feast of the Epiphany really is ever doing that. And similarly with the ambient, you know, things that are like ambient recordings, it's like, I'm never revolving around a pitch. Like the true, this is not what we've talked about at all thus far, but, you know, this whole batch of these ambient pieces, the true character of time, as an example, you know, it's like a 30-minute piece, and people would describe that music as drone. And in no way am I thinking about hovering around a tonal center.
No, there's changes.
There's a composed piece and it's slow. And that's it. And there is nuance all throughout that, but it's not responding to drone. Yeah, and exactly.
Yeah.
There's changes. And it so it's to say that there can be revealed this whole other, our attention can be more full. We can give attention to this larger expanse of what we're hearing whenever we're hearing it, and we're taken by these descriptors like drone. And playing with the sense of foreground and background has become increasingly interesting. And just using that as a way of describing how I'm experiencing things, because again, things are so visual for me when I'm creating that. That's what makes sense. It's like, this is the thing that's in your face. I don't know who to do that to other people or myself. So this is the thing that's in your face. And then this is the thing that's, in the background, and and being able to toy with that as there's this, linear temporality, and then creating that sense of it. And I don't know, that's been useful language to describe something that really interests me. And in the manner of practicing loss era Feast of the Epiphany, as that goes, the kind of intention was that the foregrounded was this like haze of partials and partials and just overtones and stuff that it's like, I know that there's stuff on the other side of this.
Yes.
And the end, that's not the point yet. That is to set up the circumstance to realize that we could let go of the way that we think we need to listen to hear the stuff on the other side.
Yes, totally.
It becomes like dimensional collapse or expansion, and being able to control that.
Yeah.
And so that was like one album of just, of Matt Canelos, actually, who was at an early listening party for Practicing Loss, said that it felt like an inhale, just one long inhale, waiting to exhale, like Waiting to Exhale, our favorite film. But that it was just like waiting for an exhalation, and that I think that that's a very valid experience of that, and that's something that's very interesting. And again, it's like that might be a metaphor for how I'm talking about how intuition and the visual versus the linguistic functions for me, is that like usually I feel like I'm on the other side of a haze trying to articulate the intuitive process into language. It doesn't make sense, but it's very clear. It's like I know what it is, and it takes a long time to get to the other side, to put it into words, and to say in the form of Feast of the Epiphany, it's like all of that overtone nuance and stuff is coming from really involved, like pretty involved through composed part writing. It's not just a sound that's put over it. It's the synth tone the whole time is doing that. So there's constant shifting. And if somebody were the type of person that were interested in doing like a spectral analysis, I'm sure you'd see some kind, like it would reveal some kind of
I mean the difference tones and all the I mean it would just and
to be responding to that. So it's not willy-nilly, that is to say, but it's and yet it's this consistent thing that's obfuscating one of my favorite things that was ever said to us by a sound person was, because of the nature of the sound when we performed live and they couldn't hear the guitars the way they wanted to, was, why even have guitar?
Yeah.
And I think that's a good question.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I'm interested. Okay, so I don't know if this is like getting too like specific, like just trying to like pick your brain for stuff that's like, I mean, I don't know if this is on topic or off topic, but I am interested in just like stuff that you read or have been reading, just as far as like influences from like other writers and thinkers and stuff. And so, I mean, it's like, we can talk about whoever you want to talk about. I just, as far as several people that you've mentioned, Gurdjieff is someone that I remember you were really getting heavy on, and the name has just keeps coming up and up and up. And I have yet to check him out. I mean, is he still like, I don't know, any thoughts on the Jeef? Like, what's the, like,
if you'd like to read about him, you should.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole topic there. I would say that, the Gurdjieff work, for people that aren't acquainted, it's a form of inner work, like any other practice that focuses on inner transformation and meditation. And I would say his writing is not that, the map is not the territory. The writing is a really great way in. And if it functions for you, then you should pursue that route. But it's, I don't know. I can say lots of superficial things about it, but I think that to speak about it solely intellectually, anyone that's read it would understand why that would be only partial and doing a disservice to it.
Okay. Word.
But it's to say that, yeah, it's, he was Georgian Armenian, turn of the century, and brought a lot of practices that were already existing into one system that he was presenting to the, maybe bringing to the West, as a way to put it, and pulling together influence from like Northern Sufism, Tibetan Buddhism, kind of esoteric Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and other sources, and bringing Vedic sources as well, and bringing them into one system. And it became called the Fourth Way, as maybe you're familiar.
I've heard that term, but I have no idea what that means. Yeah.
His description of it was that all of those ways, his like quote about it was that, there's the way of the yogi, and he's speaking about like philosophical yoga. You drop out of society, you drop out of life, and you go, to an ashram, and you're primarily dealing with the mind. And there's the way of for him, the way of the fakir, dealing with transformation being achieved through the body, physical body, dropping out of life, going and laying on a bed of nails, or like people that you see holding their arm up in the air above holy sites for years, and transformation being arrived at through this form of dropping out of life and through the body. And then the other being through the heart, and using the example of monks who go and leave life and are working primarily with the heart, if like the Jesus prayer and some of the esoteric like Christian practices. And so for him, those were each a way. And he was saying that not only is transformation possible, and each of those ways would determine that one would drop out of life, and it would take one's entire lifetime to transform, and it would be after one's death. And so the fourth way is that he asserted that one could in this life transform, and it's much more difficult by working with all three of those areas simultaneously.
Okay. Yeah. So it's been, so is that a fourth? Is this the kind of thing where it's like, it's sort of affected, it's affected how you work, and it's affected you transformationally, and is the fourth way like an actual, like a way, like on some vibe of like a particular meditation practice, or some kind of practice that you're like doing, or is it more like just these ideas have in general helped you with like an inner transformation over the past 10 years or something?
It's been helpful, and people should orient themselves to transform what we have here.
Yep.
And whatever process, whatever path, whatever entry point onto the path works for any person, I think is important. And this is one of them. I think that's the easiest way to say it, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, because you definitely have not in any way like dropped out of life, quote unquote. I mean, you know what I mean? But have you do you feel in a certain way? Like, I don't know, like that over the past 10 years, and I only say past 10 years because there are 12, because it's like, that's sort of when you started doing Feast and you started to become super prolific, on your, that's sort of, yeah. I mean, do you feel in a way that the dropping out of life on some level has happened, or is that not part of it? Is that fourth way more not about the dropping out?
Well, that's two things, but to say that I don't think I'm not dropping out of life. And I would say that really brings us back to our two sound samples that we've been loving for this.
the high and the low. Yeah.
What, life with quotation marks, and life with a capital L, it's not housed in the realm of social reality. Life is something bigger, just as sound is something bigger than like playing I have a keyboard next to me that's not turned on, but like a ping on a, we know that there's more sound and more sound to existence. There's more to sound than we realize, just as there's more to life than we realize. And I think that to come into contact with the bigger picture of it is more important than to come into contact with the superficial.
Yeah. You like, you use the word possibility a lot, like, just not just not just today, but also just like in various posts online, just, and like, I don't know, I just that like it's in the lyrics too, but just literally just like happiness can be born, like this sort of, I don't know, I get this vibe of a questioning, you're like, what is possible, like what alternatives are possible, and like not having an answer for people, but really insisting that we ask this question as far as like how we listen,
Yeah, I mean, to weave it with your own, to weave it in a crass way. So yeah, pardon me, but there's no simple answer, but it is to say that, just to thank you for humoring my joke. But it's to say, because I know that's like a whole other thing. But there is no simple answer to it, and answering it betrays the potential. I think that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. But to ask what's possible, puts us back to go back here, or to go back to the triad. It puts us back onto the two-dimensional, we're in two sides of a thing, because there's something else that's beyond what we can see. There are other things participating that are only as good as our, if you want to speak about it spiritually, we could say they're only as good as our presence. Or if you want to speak about it a little less spiritually, they're only as good as our attention, with the most capitalized A that you could give it, which is to imply that it's like there's something more to that capital A than we might realize. And how do we orient ourselves towards that? That's the best we can do, is to orient ourselves towards it. Because once we say what it is, you were making the point, and I don't know that this is 100% it, but you were making the point earlier that you're like, the affirming enters into a new affirming, or whatever. You were in the Hegelian idea. So it's, we kind of enter back into a new, we end up kind of in a loop.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, no, you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I mean, this is the kind of question I could imagine you being like, dude, why? No, but dude, why would you? The thing, when you talk about like transformation
Mm-hmm.
and having a sort of imperative in a way. I mean, I know you're not being like, forceful about it, but a thing of like, we should, like a normative thing of like, we should be looking to transform ourselves and our relationship, looking to, but then at the same time, sort of talking about things that are eternal. Like, do you have a historical view of like music? This is the most broad question on earth, but like when you talk about like the transformation, like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, are you into like, we are going to a better place, or like we have to move things forward in some way? I mean, these are you know what I'm saying? Or is it more, or is like this eternal nature of music more like this thing that everyone, everyone has always been doing this kind of transformation and needs to, and the transformation is like more of this personal, individualized thing that's always happening throughout history? Are things getting better? Like, I mean, that's such a like basic ass question, but you know what I'm saying? Is there like this, is there a collective linear time vibe to this transformation? That's something I wonder. I don't know.
I wouldn't say that it's purely linear, and how would I best describe it? The practice of who am I, asking oneself, who am I? Do you know this as a practice? And to keep it, and you find an answer and then you ask it again, right? Who am I?
Okay.
Right. And it keeps destroying itself. Who am I? To endlessly ask that forces us to come into contact with the things we think we are and what our purpose we think is. And we can keep dissolving that. And it's important to ask these questions and not turn away from what we find. And that's what life is for.
Okay. Yeah. Like, can't remember who said rituals of questioning, but that's something that somebody said in one of my podcasts with Jeremiah, where you're talking about like Jewish mysticism, or like we were kind of talking about how this sort of questioning that without really seeking final answers, constantly tearing at the thread of reality with questioning is itself a spiritual practice, broadly, but that, it's like we were talking about how like we were talking about how that comes up in Jewish mysticism. But asking who am I, and then asking again.
And to ask with the full self, not just as an intellectual pursuit. So much of philosophy is just people being stuck in their heads and being out of touch with our bodies and our feelings, and to be fully asking the question, something very different, and to constantly be in touch with that,
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, music, as far as this podcast, this conversation cannot be music. Like, it isn't. You know what I mean? It's like, I mean, we could start singing, as you said, but it's like, we can only probe at these things with language here. I mean, that embodied element, the physical element, this ain't gonna, you know what I mean? It's like music. I mean, a lot of this stuff we're talking about questioning. I mean,
I would say that I would disagree and say that life can be probed at outside of language. And not totally, but that there's a way of probing at life through more than intellect and language, and being able to come into contact with life, into greater contact with life is what it's about. That's the, I don't know why I'm thinking of like Jesco White right now going, that was it.
Wait, who is that?
Really not important. If someone gets that, they'll find it funny.
Nice.
But, it's coming into contact with the full picture is really important. And again, it's like the best we can do is orient ourselves towards this bigger picture and to be receptive to what's there. And speaking only from the head is purely thoughts. It's like are you familiar with like Vipassana silent meditation practice? You follow your breath. You go on a silent retreat, and it's the retreat is that the practice is you follow your breath, or sometimes you follow sensation and the breath together, depending. It's like more Burmese. And so with that practice, anything that comes up is labeled as thoughts and let go.
Right.
In order that we are with the practice, and what comes up is, feelings, physical sensations, things, but then there's the practice of being present and being with what's in front of us.
It's like not identifying with your thoughts, but identifying them as thoughts.
And identifying everything as thoughts, There's the practice, which can bring us into contact with this moment. And only then is where the full picture can exist. And we're never as humans able to be fully in contact with that, but to orient ourselves towards that in this life is what life is, with the most capital L is about. To me, to orient ourselves towards that and to make work of that. Because otherwise the rubber never meets the road. We're spinning wheels talking about philosophy, and the rubber never meets the road.
Right. And whereas in meditation, as a practice, it hits the road, or is supposed to. This is the idea. Yeah.
In being present, is where whatever means are necessary for that. But in really being present.
Do you have a particular meditation practice that you do, like a something that's like regular and comes from a certain method, or are you sort of
every day, and it varies? Yeah. So I have a sitting that I do one every morning, and it changes over time.
Yeah. And that's not really in any way coming from one method or school of meditation, right? This is influenced by everything you've checked out and just past experiences, right? I mean,
it's it comes from a variety of sources, and it's organized. Where it's like you take a thing on for a certain amount of time, and then we'll change it up for a certain amount of time, but it's not always the same thing. And it is arrived at in response to what's going on in life and a variety of factors.
Yeah, totally. Word, man.
Yeah.
Well, there's rarely a totally natural moment to wind down the cast. But 2 hours is my general vibe at the moment.
Great.
So man,
Well, thank you for having me.
We got into the stuff, dude. Thank you so much for coming on, man. It's like, I mean, it's also just great for me to just catch up on where you're at. I mean, we've done that a little bit with coffee and stuff, but and there's a lot more coffees to be had, but
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, man, dude. Yeah, thank you so much again. I don't know anything to plug at the last minute. I mean, we kind of plugged some stuff, but you got a concert coming up in Philly, right? You got something at Roulette in the fall as well.
Nothing at Roulette. This concert, September 15th, Feast of the Epiphany with KO Dot in Philadelphia, and just that generally I'll be working on new things, and I'm always looking to collaborate and work with other people, and I do consultation and coaching and education and all of those things. So mentoring, so, and that's that.
Yeah. There's going to be links to that below. Not only Nick's music, but also contacting him as an educator, a creative consultant, coach, for sure. So, right on, man.
Cool.
Thanks again. I'll be seeing you around the neighborhood.
Yeah, man. Be well.
All right, you too, man. Yeah, much love, dude. Peace.